Good morning, distinguished guests and ministers. My name is Amel Tabaku, Senior Director of Economic Analysis, and I'm joined today by my Bank of Canada colleagues, Madison Hollington from the Executive and Legal Branch, Julia Enright from the Financial Stability Branch, and Kuljit Kaur from Banking and Payments. Our team has been working diligently for the past 10 days to devise a set of policy recommendations aimed at informing the Department of Finance's decision-making regarding the next course of action on the central bank digital currency, otherwise known as CBDC file. Before we start, the Bank of Canada acknowledges that our head office, located in Ottawa, is on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. Next slide, please. The uptake of stablecoins and cryptocurrencies is changing the global monetary landscape. Meanwhile, growing considerations of CBDCs, notably in the United States, could put Canada's competitive edge and monetary sovereignty at risk. The uptake of these alternative currencies could reduce demand for the Canadian dollar. Therefore, consideration of a CBDC is critical, as it would enhance the efficiency, speed, and security of payments, while also ensuring that the Bank of Canada maintain its ability to conduct monetary policy and safeguard financial stability. Furthermore, we at the Bank of Canada recognize that any CBDC implementation requires extensive consultation and collaboration with various stakeholders, including other government agencies, financial institutions, and the public. Ultimately, the development of the CBDC and its potential to increase financial inclusion are well aligned with the bank's mandate to promote economic and financial welfare. Next slide, please. We have been examining the potential rollout of a retail CBDC to understand the risks and opportunities associated with digital currencies. In 2020, we identified two scenarios under which we would issue a nationwide CBDC. Firstly, if Canada becomes a cashless society, and secondly, if alternative digital currencies threaten to become widely used as an alternative to the Canadian dollar, eroding monetary sovereignty. It is now 3 years after our initial report, and neither of these scenarios have materialized, and there is also no indication that Canada will reach these levels in the near future. A 2021 survey showed that a significant percentage of Canadians, especially lower-income individuals, migrants, and other vulnerable groups, still use cash for payments, with around 80% reporting no plans to go cashless. Therefore, it is crucial to maintain a distribution model that caters to the diverse needs of Canadians. However, by 2023, things are looking vastly different. The cryptocurrency market has significantly evolved, with over 200 stablecoins in circulation worldwide at a collective market capitalization of around 140 billion US. This accounts for about 15% of the total cryptocurrency market. Additionally, 105 countries and currency unions are exploring the possibility of launching a CBDC, with most progressing beyond the research and testing stages to piloting. The COVID-19 pandemic has increased the demand for fast and efficient digital payments, underlining the importance for Canada to remain at the forefront of fintech development. A CBDC could also mitigate risks associated with criminal activity, such as money laundering and financial fraud. And although our approach at the Bank of Canada has primarily focused on monitoring the development of digital currencies in both domestic and international markets, we recognize the need to take further measures to harness new financial technologies which have the potential to disrupt the monetary policy landscape. Next slide, please. Now, looking at trends in other jurisdictions, we see that the United States has been actively exploring the potential issuance of a CBDC, researching its benefits and risks by launching pilot projects. And given the interdependency of our economies, it will be essential to keep a close watch on these various initiatives and partnerships. Meanwhile, China, with the second largest economy in the world, is conducting further pilot programs and exploring potential use cases for the EU yuan, which has been in circulation for the past several years. And there have also been promising CBDC developments in Europe, such as that of the Central Bank of Sweden, the Riksbank's e-krona pilot project, which, as you will see, has heavily influenced the design of the Canadian CBDC. Next slide, please.
Considering these CBDC advancements from other jurisdictions, the Bank of Canada's mandate, and Canada's own objectives regarding financial processes, there are 5 key criteria that any future development should consider. For one, Canada's next steps should remain consistent with the current payment modernization plan, which aims to enable faster payments and more efficient financial processes for banks, businesses, and consumers alike, while also facilitating international transactions. Canada will also look to maintain its monetary sovereignty, meaning the Canadian dollar will remain robust and not become undermined by other emerging currencies, as seen in the cryptocurrency space. As developments take place, Canada's existing financial system should also remain resilient and stable during a transition to new technologies and processes. This will ensure that Canada's domestic and international economy can remain functional and secure against cybersecurity threats. Any new financial efforts must also be underscored by universal accessibility. If all Canadians cannot use these new systems, it will threaten the economic livelihood of already underserved communities and decrease the trust that businesses and the population will have in these systems, leading to lower uptake and use. Lastly, strategies must be feasible given the economic, political, and demographic context across Canada. Next slide, please. So given these criteria and the jurisdictional learnings, we have proposed 3 viable policy options regarding Canada's next steps to address the changing financial landscape. Option 1 sees the continuation of the current research efforts undertaken by Canada to prepare for an eventual CBDC implementation. At the moment, based on the Bank of Canada's understanding of the issue, there is no immediate urgency to develop a CBDC. Thus, at this point, resources may be better allocated to other efforts, such as the country's payment modernization strategy. In this option, Canada will also look to lay the groundwork for a smooth implementation of a CBDC. This includes bolstering the technological infrastructure required by CBDCs and the entities that may be looking to participate, such as commercial banks. Also, we will look at discussing with the provinces to coordinate cyber and infrastructure strategies, remedying any legal barriers, as well as working out privacy and accessibility frameworks at the national level. Option 2 involves regulating other digital currencies that have arisen while Canada seeks to modernize its payment system. Given how volatile private digital currencies such as crypto and stablecoin are, they could pose serious challenges to monetary and financial stability if not adequately regulated. Therefore, a proper regulatory framework is required to limit volatility and illicit activity. As stablecoins start to function like money and have the potential of becoming widely used payment instruments, we propose applying the same risk, same activity, same regulation. Adherence to this principle means that existing regulatory frameworks should be leveraged when regulating these currencies so that they meet the same high standards as existing payment systems. Our third policy option involves the active preparation for Canada's own wholesale and retail CBDC, that being ECAD. This option offers a tiered implementation framework, which lays out the process Canada can follow to develop an ECAD when appropriate. More specifically, this strategy builds on options 1 and 2 to reach a level where a nationwide program could be efficiently carried out. As such, Canada will seek to remedy any outstanding legal barriers that may hinder the seamless implementation of this new financial system, as well as mitigating any cybersecurity risks and ensuring accessibility throughout. Next slide, please. So given the necessity to modernize payments, keep up with global innovation, and maintain equivalent transformative progress as our allies, such as the US, our Tiger team recommends proceeding with option 3, that being the tiered ECAD implementation framework, which incorporates option 1 and 2. This will achieve many of Canada's criteria for the financial future to a high degree. Additionally, it is relatively feasible given the flexibility in implementation, which we will cover in greater detail. More specifically, Canada can take steps to proceed with the ECAD strategy as it sees fit. Next slide, please.
To successfully implement ECAD, a comprehensive legal framework is needed to establish guidelines for issuance and oversight. To this end, we propose drafting amendments to the Bank Act and Retail Payment Activities Act. As we develop ECAD, privacy concerns must be balanced with transparency, with a focus on privacy issues related to user identity and transaction privacy. An initial draft for privacy framework should be created to address the concerns of end users, law enforcement, and sensitive data holders. This framework can subsequently be scaled to involve other stakeholders. International cooperation is necessary to prevent illicit activities, such as money laundering and terrorist financing. Collaboration with international bodies can help develop guidelines and technology for anti-money laundering compliance. ECAD must be inclusive and accessible to all, including remote and rural communities or people with limited access to digital technologies. The implementation of offline cards and a basic access framework can greatly enhance financial inclusion. Next slide, please. The step 2 in implementing ECAD is private digital currency regulation and launching a comprehensive pilot project. Regulating private digital currency in Canada is essential for financial stability. We propose leveraging existing regulatory frameworks to oversee digital currencies for payment purposes, depending on the issuer. However, enforcing securities law is challenging when digital currency operators may be located in multiple jurisdictions. Therefore, a joint effort with RCMP, provincial authorities, and financial services should be implemented. Additionally, to address the global nature of the digital currencies, we propose organizing an international forum led by Canada in collaboration with the Bank of International Settlements to discuss a common regulatory framework. Finally, we propose launching a wholesale and retail pilot project for ECAD based on Project Jasper. The wholesale pilot will test ECAD for large volume transactions between financial institutions and the resilience of the technological infrastructure. While the retail pilot, starting with a specific segment of population and eligible businesses, will test ECAD for daily transactions by consumers. The pilots would take place in FinTech Sandbox, with safeguards to protect the financial system and its participants. Next slide, please.
The third stage of implementation is the introduction of a retail ECAD nationwide, noting that this third stage would only take place once the bank determines we have reached a predominantly cashless society or there has been a significant loss in monetary sovereignty. There is large value in completing phase 1 and 2 in a timely manner to be able to incorporate feedback from one phase to the next and to ensure Canada is ready to act when needed. We recommend that widespread implementation take place under a tiered public-private system. Under this system, the Bank of Canada would issue ECAD, and then commercial banks and financial service providers would be private delivery partners to ensure their continued place in the Canadian monetary system. So while ECAD is distributed by commercial banks, it is still ultimately the liability of the central bank. In terms of a governance structure, the core rulebook and infrastructure functions would reside under the Bank of Canada's purview, while the processing services and interaction with end users would be delivered by a combination of private providers. As the stability of the launch depends on the ability to run two systems, that of cash, banknotes, and deposits, and that of ECAD simultaneously, the transition from one to the other cannot be rushed. The findings of the Swedish e-Krona pilot demonstrate the opportunity for ECAD to exist on a network parallel to, but integrated with, private partners' internal systems and merchant payment technologies. Next slide, please.
So as with any policy development, implementing an ECAD does pose several risks. Here, we've highlighted some of the main concerns involved with the new financial system and how to adequately address them given their probability of occurring. Because of Canada's robust cybersecurity strategies developed alongside both international partners and Communications Security Establishment Canada, otherwise known as CSEC, the risk of security threats is relatively low. Additionally, implementing an offline strategy will also help mitigate system breakdowns due to potential breakthrough cyber attacks. Similarly, the private sector is incentivized to participate in an ECAD implementation as it helps foster innovation, which is why this is viewed as a low probability risk. In terms of higher probability risks, public support for digital currencies is currently quite weary. So a tailored communication and financial and digital literacy strategy will be required to build trust with the public and encourage use. To do so, Canada can continue drawing upon frameworks outlined in the National Financial Literacy Strategy. Now, regarding the risk of inaccessibility, Canada will need to carry out adequate legal adjustments to ensure that basic access is provided and populations such as the elderly, the unbanked, and those in rural and remote communities do not get left behind. Given how complex and timely this process may be, and that a one-size-fits-all strategy won't be sufficient, inaccessibility poses a higher risk. Next slide, please. When moving forward with ECAD efforts, there is also likely to be some pushback from certain key stakeholders. So we've outlined ways in which the federal government and the Bank of Canada can ease these concerns. For instance, the commercial banks and the provinces will play a comprehensive role throughout the design and distribution of ECAD, ensuring that they do not feel unheard, excluded, or undermined. To address worries that a CBDC would be unsecure or inaccessible in use, cyber training programs such as that offered by the RCMP and CSEC, as well as digital literacy programs, will be delivered to the public via consumer associations and other involved parties. Now, in terms of regulation, our phased implementation approach will ensure that regulatory bodies have ample time to make ECAD adjustments. Next slide, please.
So although no complete costing formulas have been developed for the implementation of a CBDC, we have identified some major cost considerations in moving forward with our phased implementation recommendation. The need for the development of a fintech regulatory sandbox for the pilots and the creation of a digital wallet interface for end users are technological costs that will need to be incurred. The most substantial cost will be the additional time, staff, and energy needed to monitor the functioning and the integrity of the CBDC system at the Bank of Canada. Significant costs for ongoing communications campaigns will also be necessary. Next slide, please. As CBDC is often regarded as a sleeper issue in government and to the public, constant and clear communications will be needed to alert parties to the importance of the issue. Here we see a large opportunity for the Bank of Canada, the Department of Finance, and other bodies to pursue a coordinated communication strategy, with the core message being that ECAD would protect and improve the financial interests of all those living in Canada. Breaking this core message down by target audience, public consultations will be needed in order to gain an understanding of how to build trust and financial literacy with the public on the topic. Private partnerships in the financial literacy space can be leveraged here as well. Comprehensive online campaigns focusing on the improvements that ECAD can make in the day-to-day lives of Canadians will be needed to accompany the nationwide launch. For our private sector partners, along with provincial and territorial governments, there is the need to communicate the bank's commitment to a collaborative approach, working together to ensure the well-being of financial institutions, sectors, and the strength of the Canadian currency that we all rely on. Next slide, please. Our in-depth examination of the central bank digital currency space and its implications for Canada have demonstrated the need for robust and deliberate preparations toward the implementation of ECAD. We at the Bank of Canada are ready to work together with the Department of Finance and stakeholders to guide the Canadian financial system into the future. Thank you. We now open the floor to questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation on moving us towards one of the minister's key priorities from the budget. So we've got a good 11 minutes here. So I'm going to turn the floor over to our experts in turn to start poking a little bit on your presentation and give you opportunities to maybe elaborate on some of the things. So I'm going to turn first to my colleague, Shirley. Shirley, what would you like to kind of focus on in terms of the presentation?
So one thing that the team mentioned right off the top was just that it put Canada's competitive advantage at risk. So I was just wondering, just in terms of how this impacted your thinking with respect to timing. And in particular, you did mention something about moving to ECAD once there was a loss in sovereignty. So I was wondering, if this might be too late.
That's a great point. And I think the timing of our recommendation, we did give a lot of weight and consideration to that. So we really see the value in moving through phase 1 and 2 in a timely manner. We believe that this will take some significant time, as there will need to be security and legislative amendments with the provinces. And then in phase 2, there will be the need to pilot both a wholesale and retail pilot. And the understanding is this retail pilot could also take several phases. Now, I know you're addressing the key move from phase 2 to phase 3, which would be the nationwide implementation of ECAD. And what we've done is we've laid out these triggers, the triggers being a predominantly cashless society and a significant loss of monetary sovereignty. We know that indicators of monetary policy's effectiveness are being constantly monitored by the Bank of Canada. They're always looking at their adjustments of the overnight interest rate, their large-scale asset purchases, and seeing the actual effects this is having on total demand for Canadian goods. We don't believe we should wait till we are in a catch-up position or an unstable position for either of these triggers. But we do see Canada as a medium-sized power in the global economy, and we do see the need to act as such. So we see there's risks in being a first mover as well, such as technological uncertainty and free rider effects. But we believe that the Bank of Canada's close monitoring will allow us to look to a point where we are predominantly cashless or we've lost significant monetary sovereignty, not until these two things have totally happened and we are in an unstable position.
Thank you.
Anything else, Charlie?
No, that's great. Thanks.
Thanks. I'd like to turn now to our colleague Peter, who actually will have to oversee your proposal should it move forward. So, Peter.
Thanks. I guess my question really is, I mean, I understand your recommendation. You want to go to a retail CBDC or begin to pilot it and roll it out. Can you give me your thoughts on the issues of financial stability as you roll this out? What are the implications for commercial banks and the banking sector in general?
That's another really great question. Something I think we chose to do with our ECAD implementation was implement this two-tiered public-private system. By no means are we trying to undermine the challenges that a CBDC would pose for private financial actors, because there could be the loss in interest due to deposit substitution or the loss in transaction fees due to the erosion of payment volumes. However, we see this partnership as necessary because we would only really implement our retail CBDC in a scenario when these private digital currencies would also pose significant competition and threats to the private financial sector and commercial banks. So we've made the active choice to heavily involve and compensate them for the inevitable changes that they would undergo in either situation. We do see in the retail CBDC model that commercial banks would be very integral because they have the knowledge about the customer processes. They have those relationships with customers. They would be overseeing the distribution to the public and the wallets. We also see that perhaps their customer base could actually be widened because we could see more underbanked and unbanked individuals coming to see the CBDC as a solution. So we do understand that there is significant threats posed, but we believe that our choice for this tiered system will best maintain stability.
Thank you.
Thanks. Randall, what's your reaction to this proposal on first flush?
Thanks, Haki. Yeah, so there's a lot of food for thought in what you've delivered, and what that really gets me to think about is the international component. I mean, we're a heavily internationalized economy, and all of the companies that export and import have access to many different currencies, many different payment systems. Really, what is the competitive advantage of Canada developing a digital currency in that kind of landscape? What does it really add to that part of our economy that is involved in global markets?
So
Who would
seeing
like to tackle that?
Oh, sorry.
No,
So
go ahead.
our closest competitors, such as the US and other areas of the EU, have made strides to look into CBDC implementation. If Canada does not act appropriately in a timely manner, we may find ourselves at a point where we are lagging behind other jurisdictions, which would put our international economies at risk, given the fact that CBDCs implement and facilitate those cross-jurisdictional transactions. So by not having something like that in place within Canadian borders, we risk not being able to carry out those same transactions and cross-jurisdictional relationships with our strongest competitors regarding economic affairs.
May I have a follow-up?
Absolutely.
So what if any Canadian company that is exporting or importing, they could simply use the American or any other CBDC that's out there. Why devote resources from our public organizations to promoting this?
Well, we're seeing how an ECAD would improve the lives of not just those business owners and merchants, but all of Canadians. Given how accessible an ECAD would be, it would help rope in those traditionally underserved communities. If my colleague Julia would like to follow up as well.
Yeah, for sure. So we're seeing kind of the need, especially I think with the wholesale CBDC, that if some of our key competitors do go to do their large value transactions in this way, we would need to be able to follow suit. As well, we are seeing this as an opportunity to increase our international relations and build ties that could potentially in turn strengthen those economic relations. My colleague Kuljit mentioned Canada could be a leader at a global level in terms of paving a way for kind of an international regulation of stablecoins. So these relationships are going to trickle down and have an effect on our economic prosperity, which I don't think should also be overlooked at this time.
Thank you.
So I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to yield to Alan or Ron if you have a question or two. Alan?
Thank you. Great, great presentation. Thank you. You talk about engagement with the public and the private sector. Any groups in particular that you're thinking of whose views will be important in design?
Yeah, for sure. So there are certain groups, as we mentioned, when we identified those key landmines, we have things like consumer advocacy groups. There's also several environmental concerns that may be brought up given those key interest groups. We're also seeing commercial banks potentially having a stance that might contrast what the Bank of Canada seeks to implement. However, our strong communication strategy will be implemented throughout to make sure that every party involved in this process will be aware of not just how the process will take place, but also the benefits that this will bring to the Canadian economy and the Canadian population. We're seeing also an active role that these key parties will take in implementing this process. So we're seeing things like the RCMP being collectively involved in this process to ensure that security measures are strong. We're also seeing, as we mentioned, commercial banks playing a strong role in delivering the ECAD system once developed by the Bank of Canada. And in terms of consumer agency groups, we are looking to have that strong line of communication to effectively communicate that ECADs are in fact safe. They do in fact benefit the economy, and they are a system that will help the Canadian economy flourish, which inevitably will eventually bring more money in the Canadians' pockets.
Thank you. Ron, do you have a rapid question?
Sure, very quickly. So private digital, I'm focusing in on phase 2. Private digital currencies have characteristics that resemble a bank account, albeit not perfectly, that resemble a money market mutual fund, albeit not perfectly, that resemble a security. So there are different federal and provincial levels of regulation that take place across these different types of instruments. Do you foresee any FedProv issues when pursuing increased regulation of private currencies, and how would you manage that?
So I can answer that. That's a great question. Collaboration is key to a successful CBDC implementation, and we have taken into consideration working closely with provinces and territories to really ensure that their needs and concerns are also taken into account when we're designing and implementing the CBDC. So this would involve engaging with provincial authorities to understand their needs and concerns, to address any regulatory or legal issues that arise, but also to build partnerships with local businesses and financial institutions. Overall, the implementation of a CBDC with provinces in Canada, provinces and territories, does require careful planning, collaboration, and coordination coordination between various entities. And we believe kind of in terms of process, the CBDC implementation with provinces in Canada would most likely involve feasibility studies and pilot projects to really assess any technical, economic, legal, and operational aspects of the CBDC implementation. And we would also plan to involve a phased rollout, starting with a limited pilot program, gradually expanding to the broader audience once we do have more information as we conduct needs assessment with provinces and territories. And yeah, I can let anyone else speak to the legal and regulatory framework. But
unfortunately,
unfortunately, we're out of time.
So
Okay.
on behalf of my colleagues, I'd like to thank you for your presentation and for helping us think about the work that we have to do to go forward on this important initiative. So thank you very much.